everybody, and welcome also the people that are watching online. This is an extra session for Southwest Fox, and I'm glad that we have, let's say, more than a handful of people in the room, and we also have virtual attendees, I suppose. So let me get started. Um, I've named it a workshop because it is not. There's no handout. There's no um, uh, prepared examples. I want to improvise a bit and respond also to the things that you guys want to see or hear. But let me go here and switch my camera off. Okay, but before I start, I want to respond to feedback that I've received on the event here, and I also want to. Um, we've seen some things in action from some of the other speakers, and I want to mention a few things. First, I got some feedback from people who downloaded the XSharp installer from the website that they had a problem with Visual Studio 2022. And Eric Selger in his logging session mentioned that Microsoft doesn't really monitor who is using what. Well, we were using something that they did not know that we were still using. They thought that everybody had stopped using this particular component. Now, as a result, the latest public build that we have on our website um, has a problem with the latest version of Visual Studio. So if you go to the downloads area, or you can probably click from here, it's easier. Let's go from here. So if you go to the downloads area to download the installer, we have now renamed the installers and said, please read the note about Visual Studio 2022. So, and the note says what I just said. There was a problem. We have uploaded a DLL with instructions what you need to do with that DLL. So if you want to install our public builds in Visual Studio 2022 from the problem has occurred in build 17.7. You can see it on the help about screen of Visual Studio. Then you need to copy the DLL from the zip to one of these folders. So the folder names from Visual Studio are the same, but the edition determines what the subfolder is of the 2022. There is no problem with Visual Studio 27 or 29, 2017 or 2019. There's only a problem with 2022. So if you downloaded this and you get an error when you start Visual Studio or when you try to open an XSharp project, remember to install this DLL. So that's, I think, worth mentioning because you shouldn't say, oh, what a lousy product, it doesn't work. Uh, we were not warned that they were removing support for this component. And I'm not sure how this copyright-wise is, but I think we are fixing their problem, so there should be no legal issue there. We're just helping them, and by helping them, we are also helping each other. Something else that I want to mention that was mentioned in Rick Borup's session this morning is about Git. Yeah, that's a question. Yeah, for all our downloads, you have to log in. Okay. Rick Borup mentioned that you can do version control with Git. We use that in practice. So, and on our web page, you can find the icon of the cat that'll bring you to our GitHub repository. And the Git on the GitHub repository of XSharp, we have multiple repositories, but the one that you may be interested in is XSharp Public. This is the location where we keep all our source code. So if you want to monitor what we're doing, this is the place. Also, if you have an issue, you can go to issues and report your issue. And as you see, there are 130 open, but there are over 1,200 closed. The question is, no, you have to download the installer from our website because the you could in theory do that, but then you would have to rebuild the compiler, everything, and you need certain tools like we are generating the front end from the compiler with Antler, so you need to install Antler, and Antler depends on Java, and before you know it, you're installing a whole bunch of tools that you don't need. The setup exe takes care of installing it on your machine, it detects which Visual Studio versions you have. It also detects if you have the proper components installed in Visual Studio, because we depend on certain components from Visual Studio. In my session about Blazor, I mentioned that you had to install ASP.NET and MAUI support if you want that. For XSharp, you need also to have the .NET Desktop support enabled. But the installer warns you, take care of it, so I recommend to do it. You can download the source and you can build it, but I would not recommend that. So we also, the installer that you get also puts a digital signature on all the DLLs. So you can know that these were DLLs that were created by us. And the installer itself has also the digital signature, which is required by some companies. More questions?
Yeah, I'm not seeing that. I maybe have to clear my cache or something, but I'm not. You have 3 downloads up there. One under the DLL.
Yeah, if you go to download from the homepage,
Yeah,
you see 3 DLLs.
I don't see that, so I must have a.
Did you log in?
What's that?
Did you log in on the website?
Log into your web.
Oh, you need to log into the website. I'm sorry, but it's not that we want to collect your private information, but we want to just prevent that our website gets flooded by crawlers that download all our DLLs, and then our provider will complain that our bandwidth is way too high. So that's why we sort of limit this. At this moment, we have 14 and 16 available. 18 is in the final days of the beta, and it will be released to our subscribers this week, and the public release will fall in the week afterwards. And we keep on improving things. So when it's available, if you follow the website, you'll see 2.18, and 2.18 has the fix for Visual Studio built in. So I would recommend to download that when it's available. Okay. The other thing, so I mentioned Git. The other thing is that um, Rick told about his tool for SourceSafe. We use Visual Studio for development. Git is built into Visual Studio, but we also use a product called Tortoise Git, which is a shell extension. Tortoise Git, like the turtle. And it integrates in your Visual Studio or in your Explorer shell. So, for example, if I go to my folder, but this is not the one I wanted to show. Okay, over here. This folder has the same structure as the GitHub repo that you saw, and Git Tortoise Git installs itself, and I can, for example, here show the log, use all kind of things, do compare things. I prefer when I do a lot of work, I prefer Tortoise Git over Visual Studio, because Visual Studio was the Git integration there was designed by people that worked with Visual SourceSafe and Team Foundation Server, and where in Git, for example, the term for rolling back a change is revert. In Visual Studio, they call it undo. And it requires a mental switch. What is the term that they are using now in Visual Studio? What's the term for Git? So this uses the Git terminology and not the Visual Studio terminology. But both work the same. The whole principle of Git is that there's a hidden folder where the history is stored, and they both work with the same history, the same hidden folder. So there's no difference there. But it's just the way they bring it to the UI is different. And the good thing about Tortoise is that it's very configurable, so you can configure which things you use a lot, put them in the first context menu, and things you don't use a lot are in the second context menu. So you see my large context menu now contains things that I don't use a lot, but sync, commit, and show log are things that I do a lot. So that's why they are in my first. It's really configurable and it works great. And you can also configure the source code comparison tool that you want. So I have installed Beyond Compare. So when I look at my log file, I can, let's do something. Let's see this is meaningful. Let's say I want to compare this. This is the built-in stuff, but if I do compare with previous, I have to put my glasses on. Then it opens my version of Beyond Compare and shows it the way I'm used to. And this is, I personally would recommend that you use your own tool there. If you have tool of preference, and otherwise you can always use what they have. So we use Git. It works great. I saw some of the schemes that they use. We have a variation of the feature branch scheme, but we have long-living features. And this is a political discussion about what is the best approach. I think the best approach is to use source code control. That's the best approach. And you can also use it without using a repo on the web, because also a local source control already helps you. If you commit often and you make a mistake, you can roll back. And it has happened to me a lot that I start experimenting with something, and then you have to go back. Now, it's very convenient if you can go back to your local copy that you made an hour before, for example. So that's why I would recommend. Finally, before we start, as I noticed that a lot of the sessions on Southwest Fox are about tools that extend the Fox Pro IDE. And of course, that makes sense. Fox Pro itself, Microsoft doesn't do anything. So if you want to improve it, you have to do it yourself. Visual Studio is also open. So there are a lot of extensions in Visual Studio that you can use for all kinds of things. Um, what I want to mention that there is an extension created by one of our customers to extend XSharp behavior. And on top of that, we use all kind of non-XSharp related tools that help basically make life in Visual Studio easier. And this XSharp tool itself, if you want to work with Visual Studio and you want to download the extension, um, you can find the extensions in the menu here, and in here you can search for XSharp. You will find our product, but you will also find XSharp Power Tools, and I would recommend that. And the developer from XSharp Power Tools basically takes information that we store in a database about where is each function located, or where are the classes located, and they build some search windows that help you find your source easier than having to do a text source in all the Visual Studio files that are included in your solution. So if you start working with that, use XSharp Power Tools. I would recommend it. But I have dozens of other tools also installed, but it depends, of course, on what you want to do. If you need those extensions, yes or no. Okay,
Where do you get those extensions?
Visual Studio extension, manage extensions.
I type in XSharp and it says no ID
Did you go to online?
I'm not in the Visual Studio.
That's strange. You're in 2022?
I'm in previous one, so it's not there.
You're in the preview. Yeah, what I would not recommend to use the preview.
The only reason I did is because there's a compatibility issue with Xcode 15.
Oh,
So if you're doing Maui,
yeah.
it requires you to be in preview for it to work.
Okay, yeah. Well, the problem with preview
But
is,
he's not, and I am.
but the problem why I do not recommend it is that um, in the past, third-party developers like us, we got a version of Visual Studio before the rest of the world got it, so we could solve problems. We don't get that anymore. So the preview is the first version we test with as well. So there is a chance that you are ahead of our development by using preview. When it works. But if you use preview and you have a problem, it may be difficult for us to give you a quick solution. Yeah, the fact that your screen looks different is because Visual Studio is very configurable. Um, anyway, you can also go to what they call the Visual Studio Marketplace, and you can also search there.
How do you go there?
I would say Google Visual Studio Marketplace. I have no idea what the URL is, but that's where this screen gets its information from. What? Well, but probably Bing has it too. What are you using then if you're not using Google or Bing? Alta Vista? Shit. Oh, that works, yeah. Anyway, let's get started with content. Okay, good.
Now you're giving me crap.
Yeah. Um,
Because I'm not a developer.
this is already getting into the interesting discussion session that I had hoped for. I have prepared some things to give you a little bit more information about the difference between Fox Pro and XSharp and where we are with the language support. And I've also, I also want to show you to convert an application that I must promise I've only seen in Fox Pro, and I tweaked Fox Pro so that it would run. So I set up the database, but I have not converted it yet. So I have no idea where we'll succeed in converting that. But before I go to that far, I want to explain a little bit more of what we have done and show you the tool that we use and explain what the tool is doing. Okay, at this moment we support most of the DBF commands, and we are compatible with both VO and Clipper, but also with Visual Fox Pro. When you work with .NET, classes are organized in namespaces. I think I've mentioned it in one of my other sessions. For stuff that's Fox Pro specific, we have a special assembly or DLL. It's called XSharp VFP, and there is also a namespace in there where VFP specific classes are stored. So if you want to do something that requires Visual Fox Pro support, make sure that you include the XSharp Visual Fox Pro assembly. Otherwise, functions like, for example, just stem or just ext will not work because these are part of our VFP assembly. In theory, we could have put them in a common assembly, but we want to keep, well, we want to keep things where they belong. And people who are coming from XBasis Plus or Visual Objects will never use just stem or just ext. The people coming from Fox Pro will. So there's a separate namespace and a TLL, and that's XSharp VFP. We have, as far as I know, implemented most of the Fox Pro commands, but there may be things that are not working. Like I said in my vendor session, we use a preprocessor, and a preprocessor is basically a kind of regular expression search replace on steroids. So we can have all kind of it can recognize, for example, expressions. So it's not just recognize single words, but it can also recognize expression that starts with a paren and closes with a paren, and everything in between there will be seen as one logical unit, depending on the wildcard tokens that are used in the preprocessor. We have implemented most of the Fox Pro support at the command level by using the preprocessor. It also means that it's relatively easy to adjust it when we find something that's not working. In my session, the vendor session, I did a sample where we had a clear command. Now, for the quick solution, I translated clear to nothing, so it compiles. But of course, I could have also, when this application would have used a terminal window, I could have cleared the console window there if I wanted. But I knew this application was just GUI, so there was no need to clear a terminal window. But if there was, then you could use that and map the command to the function that does that. Okay, if you want to work with Fox Pro, you have to choose the Fox Pro dialect. And the Fox Pro dialect is an indication to the compiler that certain keywords become available that were not available for the other languages. The keyword this, for example, is only available if you compile in the Fox Pro dialect. All the other dialects use self. And for example, the operator between an object and a property, or an object and a field, or an object and a method, in most of the other dialects is a colon. Fox Pro has a dot, and by enabling the dialect Fox Pro, you will also enable the fact that the compiler understands that a dot can be a separator between an object and a method. Other dialects also have support the dot, but the dot has another meaning there. If you, for example, have a type like system string, it's called system.string. And if the system.string has a method at the class level, so not an object method, but a method that belongs to the class, then there's also a dot used. So the dot can have different meanings. And if you use the Fox Pro dialect, it's also allowed as a separator between an object and what we call an instance method. So the concept of class method or static methods and instance methods is probably new because you don't have that in Fox Pro, but that is very common in .NET. And the way I see it, you could say that what class methods are is what in our languages functions are. So they have no self or no this, they operate on something. And some of them return on the object, or some of them, for example, manipulate strings. And these you could see these as extensions to the string class. Just stem or just ext operate on strings. So these are functions, and if you would look at how we have implemented them, these have become static methods or class methods. Another option that you have is to enable, we have two special Fox Pro command line options. Normally you would never use these command line options because if you use the IDE, it'll generate these command line options and to tell the compiler that we want to do something special for Fox Pro. The first one, I'm not sure why my colleague didn't put this on the slide, is Fox 1 tells that all the Fox classes automatically inherit from custom, also if you do not specify that they inherit from custom. And the second one will enable Fox Pro parentheses for array access. If you don't use parentheses for arrays, I would recommend that you do not use that option. Because if you use parentheses for arrays, um, it's kind of an overloaded operator, we call that. It could also, let's say a open parent, 10 close parent could also be a function call. And if it's with square brackets, then the compiler knows that you want to access an array element. There was a question. Don't forget it. So square brackets always work, and the Fox2 enables parents for accessing array elements. Yes, question in the room?
Is the square bracket emulated in Fox2 anyway? It's for arrays and for strings?
The square brackets are indeed also in Fox overloaded for arrays and strings. However, for a string, there's not O dot in front of it, or a dot within a with expression, because then the string itself is not prefixed with something that could indicate. We support the square brackets too in the language, of course, we have to, um, because sometimes you want to embed a quote, single or double quote, and then the square bracket is really convenient. However, our language also has other ways to do it. You can also use what a bit like C Sharp does it with backslash n for catch returns, and then backslash double quote in a string. But in that case, you have to prefix the string with a special character to say this is what we call an extended string, and then we accept the C Sharp syntax. But yes, square brackets are overloaded. In fact, in .NET, they are much more overloaded because .NET also knows the concept of what we call an attribute. An attribute is like meta information that you could add to a method or to a parameter. And in that case, the square bracket also means an attribute. So our parser has to distinguish between different uses of the square bracket, but so far it manages to do that.
Yeah.
Another question.
Yes, since we're talking about, in passing, you mentioned quotes, we're talking making a way you can quote within quote within quote, square bracket, double quote, single quote.
So the question is if you can do square bracket, double quote, single quote. If you start a string with a square bracket, it's going to pass, it's going to look for the closing square bracket. Anything you put in there is basically seen as a character. It doesn't not seen as a string delimiter. So the square bracket in the location where a string is an accepted token, so that's not after the dot because then we expect an identifier. But in that case, so when the square bracket could be a string, then anything until the closing square bracket is considered a string. Of course, otherwise the language would not work. Another question in the room? Yeah, go ahead.
If we are on the square bracket with strings, strings and square brackets are a little bit different than any other string because the short define the result between short brackets by an unstring by string not.
Okay, the question is the square brackets in FoxPro at least, and I hear something new now. If you have a sharp define or inside the square bracket, it gets evaluated. That's new. That's something we need to look into. So I will. Can you send me a reminder about that, or someone make notes? Because if I make notes now, then I get distracted. But that's something we need to look at. But we do have different options for strings. We also support what C Sharp calls interpolated strings, where you put like a macro inside the string, but then the C# way. So you can do open curly, name of a variable, close curly, and then it gets expanded into the value of this variable. We support that too, but in that case, you need to prefix the string with an I. There are different things possible, but we support, if you don't do anything, we support the native syntax of Foxborough or all the X-based languages have, but you can also use extended strings and interpolated strings. But these are prefixed with either an E or an I. So I double quote or E double quote, and then the string becomes extended or interpolated. Okay. Um, there's also an option if you create a new FoxPro project that we will automatically enable what we call late binding or dynamic typing. So you do not have to specify type for your local variables. It's recommended. You will get better code, but it's not necessary. So we support what FoxPro has. In fact, FoxPro ignores the types. It's just for the editor. So we are a bit stricter. If you put a type there, we will enforce the type. So you can, in FoxPro, you can type something as column and still assign a string to it. We do not allow it. If you say it's a column, then it must be a column. It will be resolved at compile time, and the result is also code that is unambiguous. It will also always be a column. So if you go move things over, we recommend to use typing and not to use, say the fuzzy thing that have to be looked up at runtime, because you may have hidden time bombs in your code. And I'm sure you all have had occasions where that happened. Even if you type STR last name, someone can still assign a date to it or a number, and that can have unexpected results. Okay, about database support. Of course, we support DBF, CDX, FPT, including indexes. We automatically open the primary index. So, and if you have more than one CDX, we open those if you ask for it. Um, different X-based dialogues have different behaviors. FoxPro, if I remember correctly, opens the primary index but does not set the order to the first one. So it keeps it in what we call natural order. But other dialects enable it. If you compile for the FoxPro dialect and you include this XSharp VFP, then the defaults of the environment will be set so that it mimics what you have in FoxPro. So then automatically CDXs with the same name as the DBF will be opened, but it will not switch to the first tag in the CDX. I would say, I'm not sure why we have most here. I say all the DBF commands are included. So FoxPro has options like skip in, or other dialects did not have that. We have added all of that and it works. Um, the only thing that we do not have at the moment is select on DBS. So, and I mean with select, I mean SQL select. Um, and the reason for that is that we were not sure how many of you are using that against DBFs. Um, because I've seen more and more Foxborough people move away from DBFs to SQL, and writing a SQL parser and query analyzer basically is a lot of work. And we were not sure of if that was accidentally something that you guys really need. Question, yeah. So there's someone at least in the room here that does it a lot. We'll have to look into that, what we can do. At the moment, we are working on implementing stuff like create cursor, and on cursors created with create cursor, we will support select and insert into, because for those cursors, we will use a local database, an SQL database, and then we leave all the SQL parsing to the database. But for joining a DBF then with a cursor from, so that's something we need to look into. So far, we had nobody who was really using that except for cursors, and that's where we are already implementing SQL for cursors. So we need to see what we can do there. Okay, DBC support. We support the DBC's partial. That means that if you open a free table and it has a backlink to the DBC, we will open it. Because, for example, the Northwich sample that comes with FoxPro, has a company table or customers table, and it has a backlink to the DBC, and the index expression in there is on company name. But if you count the characters from company name, it's more than 10. In the DBF itself, the name is abbreviated until the first 10 characters, and the longer name of the field is in the DBC. So we open the DBC to get this long field name, otherwise we cannot evaluate the index expressions. Of course, you can also open the DBC in code, so just like you do in FoxPro, and then we will automatically fetch the extra information from the DBC. What we do not support yet is remote views. We are working on that. And we do not support yet triggers. I'm not sure how many of you use triggers in the DBC. Triggers are typically something from the SQL environment, and but we can have a look at it. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're leaving? Yeah.
Safe travels.
Okay. So, but we're working on that. But remote views is technically not a problem. It's just a question we need to add some code to the use statement. Basically, we'll say, okay, if the use is at the table, then it's easy. If it's a remote view, we will basically translate it into something that you also do with SQL exec. Because you basically, the remote views are nothing more or than a SQL statement which results in a local cursor. And technically that's not a problem. We just need to intercept the opening of a table and see if this is declared in the DBC and it is a remote view, get the connection information, open the connection, and fetch the data in the local cursor. All those building blocks we have, but we just don't know where to start. It depends on priorities from customers, basically. All our development is customer driven. So if we have someone who needs remote views, it gets a higher priority. And a lot of what we've added already is because people ask us to do it in a consultancy project. So we do support all the SQL functionality. So we have SQL String Connect, SQL Connect. You can specify a ODBC data source, or you can do the full connection string. We support SQL exec, both with async support and not. We support the parameters in there. That works. We have extended it a bit because in our SQL exec support, we use ADO.NET for the data access. And ADO.NET does not only have ODBC, but it supports many more data providers. So our approach is that you specify a data provider. If you don't, we assume you use ODBC, so your connection string is ODBC. But if you say, for example, I want to use ADO or I want to use native SQL Server, then the connection string has to be ADO is OLADB connection string, or SQL Server has to be a SQL Server connection string. But from then on, when the connection is open, everything will be the same, just like you have in FoxPro. And we are also working on MySQL and SQLite in this area. Question?
So if you just said that applies to things that are not CDF.
This is not DBF.
CDF that's not in use. Using a DBF, then what you just said does not apply. Is that correct?
The question is if what I just said applies to the DBF, but I'm not sure because I have said a lot which sentence you refer to.
So, you have native access to DBF.
Yes?
You say you have to do an ODBC connection or some connection to open a DBF.
No, we do not have to use ODBC to open it. The DBF support is native built-in, written in XSharp, including, and I'm not sure if you have looked at the index files, all our index support with all the compression and all the stupid things that we needed when we were running this on the floppy is still in there. It's written in XSharp. If you want to access remote data, or well, it can be on the same machine, using SQL exec, or using remote views, or using a cursor adapter, we will support that. We will not write our own engine for that. We will build on top of ADO.NET. And ADO.NET comes with built-in providers, but you can also use third-party providers. And we give you the opportunity to tell our SQL exec layer, because this is what this page is about, which provider to use. By default, it will be ODBC, so your existing ODBC strings will work. Okay. Yeah, I can skip this. All our commands are basically pre-processed. Let's just forget this and let's go to Visual Studio. Do you want a Visual Studio with super large fonts, or is a normal Visual Studio also good for today? Yeah, normal. Yeah, we're not sitting in the end of the room anymore, so I prefer normal because then it looks a bit better. Okay. Um, Before I start converting an app, I want to explain a little bit about how Visual Studio works and how .NET works with regard to forms. Because source code is source code. When we convert Visual Foxborough apps, PFG files will just be included as in the solution. That's not another thing. However, forms will be converted into Windows forms. When we started the process of building the migration tool, we have made the decision to map Foxborough forms to Windows forms because they look the most like what you have in Foxborough, and they have an event handling mechanism that also looks a lot like Foxborough. WPF would have also been an option, but it works quite different. And we could have used what Microsoft called modern UI. It's a single document interface. That's absolutely not what you have in Foxborough. So it was either WPF or WinForms, and we have chosen for WinForms. And I want to give you a bit of an idea how a normal WinForms app in Visual Studio works and how basically how it's designed. And to do that, I will open the desktop application here in XSharp. The list of templates is going to be extended with a couple of Foxborough templates in the not too far future, but I'll choose now what's called a Windows Forms application. You see we do support WPF, but for now I do Windows Forms. And when you do that, Visual Studio creates a form based on a template that we provide, so we can put in also other templates. And the template tells it that it creates a project with a form in there with the name Form1 and a program. The program is the entry point of this application. This uses plain .NET Framework classes and methods. And it basically says that it needs to enable visual styles, whatever that may be, and set compatibility text rendering. I'm not going to go into detail. And then it says run this form. So this is a single form application. The syntax here is equivalent to what you guys know as create object and a string. However, the advantage of this is that the compiler can now create the string inside create object has no special meaning for the compiler. It's just a string. So it cannot tell you if you make a typo there. If you do create object form1, but form1 doesn't exist, you will discover that at runtime because it tells you I cannot find form1. This syntax where the form1 is not in a string, but it's as an identifier in the code followed by two curly braces, tells the compiler that it wants to create an object of type form1, and if you make a typo, the compiler will warn you, or actually error, that it doesn't find form1. Form1 is this thing what we see in Designer now. If you look in Visual Studio, forms and user controls have two views. You have a view, what they call the design view, and we have a view that's called the code view. And you can open both at the same time. So what you see here in Form1 is the source code behind Form1. And Form1 design is how it looks in the app. And what you see here is exactly what the customer will see, just like in Foxborough. So the form here is based on the code. There is no SEX file or something like that, no binary file or no XML file that describes the form. The form is based on source code. But as you can see, there are no controls here, no dimensions, no colors. What Microsoft has decided several years ago is that those UI components will be stored in a separate file that is dependent on the main file. So you know uh, where generated code is located and which is separated from the code that we write ourselves. To give you an idea, if I go to the toolbox, this is the Visual Studio toolbox. I have updated it. I can, for example, put a button on here, and in the form PRG, nothing has changed. But if you look in the form designer PRG, we now see a button 1. It's the name as System Windows Forms button. And in the code with the method name initialize component, this is automatically called from the form PRG. It's going to build the button, set its properties, it sets some stuff at the form level, and then the form is ready and can be shown. So each time you add a control, let's put a checkbox here, and what else? A label. I'm not going to try and make it fancy, but just give you an idea. If you go in the form designer, you see that it drops the code in there. So the form designer does not directly read this code. It asks us, okay, what's in this code, and we tell it that there are buttons and a list box and a checkbox, and that these are the properties that you have to set, and based on that, it builds the form. So this is the way it also works in C#. This is the way Visual Studio works. So you have a file with the source code that puts basically the initial properties of the controls, and you have a file where custom code is written. And to give you an idea about that, let's go to the button. I'm going to open, I haven't opened it yet, the property window. Visual Studio is very configurable, so you can drag and drop this wherever you want. And especially if you start switching with resolutions like we've done this week, it can become very confusing. But as you can see here, this is the property window, this is the button. You can see it on top. You can also choose other controls here. And the properties in here that are gray are not set, are default, and the properties that are black are changed. So in this case, the button has text that you see, and that can also be, for example, OK. And that's now also in black. And you can see the name. This is the name of the control, or the name of the property, basically, of the control. Now, you could call that button OK. That would make sense. So these are all the properties, the location, and if you move it around, you see that the location changes with it. So, and the good thing to realize is that this form editor creates the forms based on the code. So it actually, there is a form running right now, and it reads those properties and shows those in the property window. So there's no translation there. It's directly what it is. What you do not do here, I think you do that in FoxPro, is set the X and the Y separately, or the width and the height. In Visual Studio, those are assigned in one go. So you set the dimension and you set the location with one property. However, you can, if you want, you can also edit these by directly typing something in here. So you can, if I set block on, I can change the size by giving the value. So if you want to have exact values, that's all possible. And if we look in the designer PRG, get rid of this for now, then the size of the button must be 100. As you can see, that's also the case. So this is how forms work. And when we take your FoxPro form, we will convert it to something like this. So you have the same behavior. Now, of course, you do not just put buttons on there, but you will also want to do events or event handlers, basically. On the property window, you see this lightning symbol. That's what indicates that this is the page where all the events are stored. There are many, many events. And the most common one is, of course, the click event. Now, in the case of a button, if we double click on it, it assumes that we want to do a click event, and it generates, and now no longer in the designer file, but it generates in the form file the code that we write. So in here, we can tell it whatever we need to do. Now, when I just started this project, I didn't tell it to use the Foxflow syntax. So in here, I cannot not use this. Oh, it does. Okay, I didn't even realize. So my colleagues have to add something. Okay, super. And I can specify that I want to call a close method, for example. Or you could also, now let's not do this too close, but, oh, come on. I have a checkbox. Now I have double dots, that's not good. And I could change, for example, the text on the checkbox. Something like that. You have access to the properties. As you can see, our editor knows about the properties. So when I type this, I see the built-in properties of the form. That's an important distinction between FoxPro and Windows Forms. The method handler is on the form. Of course, you can access the button. So button OK is the button. So that's basically what would be your this in the FoxPro code. Over here, you would have to say which button you want to do something with. And then you can see all its properties. Because the code generated by the Windows Forms editor is strongly typed. So as you can see, the button is System Windows Form button. We get code completion for all the methods and all the properties of the System Windows Form button. So, and not only in the editor, but this is also enforced at compile time. So you cannot do anything here that doesn't exist for the button. So something like, I'm not sure, I think you guys also have a checked property for a checkbox. That would not compile. But for the checkbox, it would compile. So depending on the object, in the checkbox, you would get it in the completion list, and now I didn't see this in the completion list. But let's not do that. Let's just see what happens. And by the way, there's also a Form 1 resix. Now you may wonder what that's for. Resix file is a kind of file where you can store extra information about a form. And especially if you want to go to localizable forms, you can turn the forms, you can set a property that this form has to be translated, and then you can store the captions and the texts basically of the buttons and the size of each control per language in a separate file. And then depending on a runtime setting, let's say you want to enable the Spanish or the English version at runtime. So the designer is prepared for that. It's beyond the scope of this session, but the resix files store that information. And this gets stored as extra contents in your exe or DLL. Question?
I noticed you use the colon equal syntax.
Yeah.
That's not, I don't think.
That's not FoxPro, no.
Okay.
Okay. We support both. So if you go to project properties, and there on the language tab, it says, now this is not to mean that you guys are old, but we allow old style assignments, which means we allow single equals assignments. However, we recommend not to do it because the single equals is overloaded. And I think it was a Christoph Wallenhaupt session where you had the PHP single, double, and triple equals. How far can you go? I'm waiting for the four double equals. But if you have a line like A equals B equals C, what is the result? What are you storing in A? Are you storing the value of C in there? Or are you comparing B with C and are you storing the result of the comparison in there? That's not really clear. So if you want to be clear and you want to assign the same value to A and B, that is the value C, then you do colon equals A colon equals B colon equals C. Then the compiler knows, oh, they will all have the same value. If you use the single equals, then we will do just what FoxPro does. So the first equals will be the assignment, and then all the other equals will be seen as a comparison operator. But it's confusing.
Yeah.
So we support it, but you have to enable this option. And in FoxPro projects, this is enabled by default. But most development languages have separate operators. And FoxPro is, a bit strange in this area. Not only in this area, by the way. Foxflow but it's really cool. I've seen you guys use it, and I'm impressed with what you can do with Foxflow. But yeah, it's not doesn't operate the same way that many other languages do. So if you want, as a proof, I will enable it, and I will go to my form PRG and say that it works. Now I'm compiling. I'm pressing Shift F6, and it compiles. As you can see, this I didn't show you, but this is an executable. So on the application page, it says that it's going to generate a Windows application. You can also choose what's called a console application. And console application always starts with the console window. You can still have Windows Forms in there, but there will be a console window visible too. And if you create a Windows application, then it will only be a Windows application. The third most common one is class library, which is what you use if you to generate a DLL basically, which can be referenced by other components, so you can store common forms or common code in a DLL. But it also didn't show, but in here you can choose the .NET Framework version. What does that mean? How .NET Framework is a bit strange. There's a reason why they're switching away from it. So on your machine, you only have one .NET Framework version. So what does this do then? Well, on your development machine, I'm assuming you have patched Windows to the latest version of 10 or 11, you will have .NET Framework 4.8. However, maybe your customers are running Windows 8 or maybe even Windows 7, and they do not have Windows Framework 4.8. By choosing a different framework here, you are telling the compiler, don't directly compile against the DLLs that are on my machine, but use a special set of DLLs that describe the state of the framework when it was 4.5 or when it was 4.6. So methods that are not available in 4.5 or 4.6, but that are available on your machine, it will flag then as I can't find them. Because and these assemblies, we call them reference assemblies, are assemblies without code, but they only contain the meta information about the state of .NET 4.5 or 4.6. So only all the methods that were available in 4.5, 4.6 are in those reference assemblies. And if you use something that wasn't available then, the compiler will warn you that, or it's not a warning, it's error, say this method, it doesn't exist. So this, at runtime on your machine, even though you use .NET 4.5, for example, you will still use the .NET framework that is on your machine. And the way the .NET framework is designed, you can only have one active .NET framework. So it will use, if you have 4.8, it will use 4.8. But you will know that you have not, by accident, used methods that do not exist in an older version. Our runtime, for example, we compile against 4.6. And there's a table online that tells you which version of the operating system had which version of the framework. And we did a kind of questionnaire under our customers, say what kind of machines do you and your customers have? And we decided to only stick to what was available in 4.6. And stuff that was added later, so we will never be accessing from our runtime. Of course, if you use your application and you compile against 4.8, you can still use the newer stuff. But our runtime assemblies will not use that. So that's this choice. In a future version of XSharp, you will get .NET 5, 6, 7, 8 in there. Now 5 is already outdated, so we probably do not have that. But if your machine has .NET 5, we will find it and we'll give you the option, but it's not recommended. The current versions at the moment are 6 and 7, and in a few weeks, .NET 8 will be released. And if you would run now in Visual Studio 2022 and you do a .NET app, let's say in C#, you will not have .NET 8 available, but if you run the preview version of Visual Studio, it comes with the preview version of 4.8, you will have, so with 8, you can have 8 available. We don't support those yet in the product system. However, as I've shown in the Blazor session, if you have a DLL and you call it from a .NET 8 or a .NET 7 app, it just works. Because the binaries are identical. As long as you do not use stuff that's not available in .NET 6 or 7 or 8, you can just use the same assembly inside a running app of the newer .NET version. Other tabs here that also have relevant information are language and dialogue. And I'm not going to go through all the details, but there are many options that you can enable or disable depending on what you want to do. This application now was compiled for the core dialect, and as a result, some features are not available here. Memory variables, and with that we mean publics and privates, require runtime support. And the XSharp core does not require runtime support. Now I could switch the app to the Foxpro dialect, but then I would also have to link in the support dialogues, and then I can use direct memory variables. We'll show that later in your converted app. And other options like case sensitivity, what do you want to do if there's a numeric overflow. You can enable zero-based arrays if you want. .NET uses zero-based arrays like C++ and C#. However, our compiler understands that is for humans, that's not a normal thing to do. Humans are used to having 1 to count and not 0 to count -1. So we allow you to use 1-based arrays, but the compiler will, as you probably guess, simply subtract 1 to make it work with what .NET wants. So, but there's an option because the subtraction costs a fraction of time. I would say your code is probably not so efficient that you would notice, but if you write core level code, like for example in our RDD or in our runtime, in certain areas where performance is critical, we compile with zero-based arrays to save this extra step from subtracting 1. So there are several options that you can set, and here are some special dialect-specific options. These options are for all dialects. There are options that are only available if you do not have core dialect. I mentioned the Foxpro things. These are also on this page, and we have some XSharp compatibility things. Yeah, let's just go further on. And on the build page, we have some options. And this is also, if you're new to Visual Studio, it's also good to realize. I'm not even sure how that works in Foxpro, but in Visual Studio and in most development languages, you can choose whether you're going to compile a debug build or a release build. And the difference is that in a release build, the compiler does some extra optimizations and may move code around. And as a result, if you would debug that code, the cursor would jump in maybe in a strange order through the file that you wouldn't expect. A debug build never has that. And a debug build also stores extra information in an external file to help you debugging. If you look at this sample, for example, and I will go to my form, let's see what happens if I go set a breakpoint here. Now if I run, I'm now running in debug mode. You can see it on the top because this combo box has debug. And if I press OK, I will end up in the debugger, and I can watch. I have too many windows open. I can watch the locals, and as you see, even though we type this, our Visual Studio integration shows self. It's basically self and this are synonyms. You can use both, and we can see the checkbox is there. It's probably somewhere in this list. It's a long list. Checkbox 1, and it has the text checkbox 1. But if I run this code, so I do step, you can see that the checkbox text has changed to clicked. What Visual Studio does, I think it's really nice. If you change one of the locals, it highlights it in red, so you see something was changed. And especially if you have a long list of variables, that's maybe helpful to find what happened. And as you would expect, this is now doesn't have checkbox 1 anymore, but it has clicked. And normally you would do something like disclose. Oh yeah, I have at this moment I have automatic completion of parentheses, and I don't always have that. That is the problem. If you develop the IDE, you don't always have all the options enabled. But typing an open paren automatically inserts the closing paren. The same is for strings. If you do this text equals it automatically inserts the closing paren. All these things are configurable. In Visual Studio, many things you can find in tools options. And if you look for, there's a lot in here because it depends. Visual Studio is nothing more like a collection of tools. But if you want to find our tools, you type XSharp on the bottom top, and you see our stuff. You see our editor support, and let's see. Well, we have stuff like when you want to see the file completion, if you want to have code completion, stuff like that. There's all kind of stuff that you can choose here. How do you want your keywords to be uppercase, lowercase? None means don't touch them. So we support all of that. So let's just leave it. So if I move away from this line, you will see keywords were uppercase, it'll automatically change to uppercase. We do that on the event when you change the line. So there's lots of stuff like this in here. Yeah, what else? Yeah, I mentioned this add-in. If you install the XSharp Tools add-in, you will find in the editor an entry code browser and find namespace. And code browser is useful because if you want to know where form declared, for example, it tells you exactly in which file form is. Now, for a file like this, that's really a no-brainer. But let's imagine that let's close this one. Let's, for example, go to the solution that contains the runtime of XSharp. That is a bit bigger than the single form application. Take a bit longer than the previous one. But now, if I go somewhere in the code, and I would use code browser to find, let's say, form, it gives me all the locations where the form is. And these icons here, I didn't code this, so I don't take credits. But if you can want to know only properties or functions or variables, no, I want to know classes. Yeah, it's going to show only classes that have the word form in them. So this is really convenient. And because one of our third parties does, just like you guys have Tor, it makes working with Visual Studio much more convenient. Okay, so this is basically one of those tools in action. And we have lots of tools here. Some of them are useful for us only, others would be useful for you. It depends on what you do. Okay, let's go and convert the Foxflow app. I think I'm ready for that now. Yeah, okay. Before I do, I'm going to show you the tool that we have for that. The tool is still in beta, but will be released in the coming weeks. Is it here? Yeah. And what this tool does, it looks at your Visual Fox Pro project and analyzes the project, and then based on a set of rules that we have given, it'll create a Visual Studio solution with forms, performs, and it will take the source code and it move all the stuff over to Visual Studio. Now, when doing that, we have to make some changes, and we have tried to not hard code all those changes. So this tool contains instructions of how to make changes. To give you an idea, we have a set of rules. For example, if we convert a form, we have given it rules that say, okay, assuming we have a FoxPro object of type form, this is the first string here, what should we do? This means it translates it into a form object. Form set becomes a form set. Most of the names are the same. I think there's one that is different. I thought it was cursor. Yeah, there is a cursor object in .NET. That is represents the cursor of your mouse. And to avoid confusion, we have decided to call it debug cursor. So we will have no problems distinguishing between the visual cursor and the database cursor. We also have some other classes here, but basically we translate your code to .NET based on rules. Now, if you wanted to transfer your app to not use the standard .NET controls, but maybe use DevExpress controls or Infogistic controls, you can use this script and enter other class names. And then we will use those class names. So you are free to use whatever you want in this case. The same is same kind of rules we have for properties. So when you have a property in your Foxflow code and it has a caption and you're assigning the name of the form to it, we translate that for the form designer to assigning the value to the text property, because that's called text in Visual Studio in .NET. If you specify a client size, we convert that to system drawing size, that's the type that has two values, and we take the width and the height of your properties and combine them into the assignment of the size of the form. So top and left are also not, they have an empty string, but you will see that, where did Fabrice put that? Well, I think he didn't put the location in there. These are basically ignored when convert. I think he should put the location in there so that the initial location of your form can be set. The data session gets converted. So these are the rules that we use. And so we have rules like that also for events. So we take .NET events, we take your events and we convert them to .NET events. A click becomes a .NET click event. And since there are parameters in .NET are a bit different, this specifies the signature that needs to be generated so that it will work the way you expect it to work. For others, we do not have this signature. We have added an extra layer that translates it into the Foxflow syntax. And for all the methods that we so far have implemented, we have done rules, and it is very likely that you will have used stuff that we do not have yet. And we can, by adding rules, we can automatically translate those two. And in here we have some templates, and these contain, let's start with init type, these contain some code that will be inserted, for example, at the start of a form and at the end of a form. And by using this, you can control the code generation. So each form will have a public constructor. These are, by the way, the methods, and the type is over here. So this is the start of the type. This is, okay, the form name and the super name. It's going to put the data environment, whatever it is for this form in there, and the children. And the children are, in this case, the methods, or so the functions from your form, which are methods in the terminology of .NET, will be translated and will be inserted in here. So you, if you wanted to do it in a different way, we can simply change the template and do it the other way. Now let's run this and give you an idea what happens with code. Okay. In the application menu, we can some settings about default folders, etc. We can control some rules for the exporting. I leave them on default for now, but we have some options to enable certain features. We can also tell you what to do with export errors. You can specify folder names for different items. So we have decided that different items for your Foxflow project will be exported to different folders. We can give you control over that. What we do with class libraries, should they go to a subfolder, yes or no? And if we export again to the same folder, should we clear the folder first, or should we simply write in existing folder and stuff that you have added in the folder would then not be deleted by us? Now, let's ignore this for default and let's try to export a form. Now I'm going to find the project. Now I'm going to use a project that I have never exported before. I should probably run it first so you guys have an idea. Uh, I know you guys are probably using a super advanced Tor project manager and not this old thing. I had no idea that Tor and an advanced project explorer existed. So for me, this was the only way to do it. This shows this project is coming from a French user. I think it's the guy who also did this VFP help file. There's a new VFP help file in a GitHub project. I'm not sure what his name is, but he's the author of this project. Oh, I know his name. It's on the help about screen later. We can see his name. Anyway, we're going to run this, and this is an app for room reservation or something like that. I have no idea what it does because it's all in French. But let's see the name of the guy who wrote this code. Oh, it's not here. I've seen the name in the app, but I don't know where. Was it here? No, forget it. Okay. Here is some form. There are some forms, and we will see if we can convert this to .NET. Now, if you look in the Project Explorer, I have no idea how to bring the Project Explorer back, but I've known if I open it again, then I'll see it. You guys probably know your way much better inside Visual Foxtrot than I do. There are some components here. Um, I have no idea what each of these components does. I've received this app a few days before the event, so I had no idea to inspect it. Base objects like a combo, I think, and a grid. Let's just give it a try and see if we can convert this. There's some forms. Now this is one of the forms we saw. I think we had a form of uh, login. It has the picture in there. So I think this is a fairly normal, not too big Foxtrot app. It's in French. Can't help it, but it's at least I have no prior knowledge to whatever's in here. I asked Fabrice, who is my colleague who is responsible for the Foxtrot exporter. He would have loved to be here, but he's also a teacher and he had to teach this week. So yeah, his boss said no, you cannot go. So let's try to convert this. So this is the Sal app. Okay, where are we? We are here. It's on D. It's on D because the customer had it on D and there were hard-coded paths in there. So where is Sal? Project Sal. Okay, and let's move it also to D. And first I'm going to run what my colleague created and analyze, which basically gives us an idea of everything that was found. So it finds the form and the screens, it finds control libraries, it finds reports, source code. You see, it also finds source code that's relative to the location of the project, and it finds the database, the DBC, and there are no free tables. If I remember correctly, this application uses remote views, which is a problem because I don't support remote views yet. But first, let's see if we can get the forms over. That would be already a huge achievement. No, it crashes. Could not find. Come on, let's rebuild this. I have moved things around on my machine, and I didn't rebuild after that. So that's probably what happened. And it's a bit slow because I run the debug version, development version of the XSharp compiler. So in case there's a problem, I get a huge call stack where I can see what the problem is. On your machine, you will have a faster compiler. Okay, let's try it again. This is weird. I know why. I'm gonna move it back to the original folder. I thought I would be smart to remove Fabrice's name from the folder, but apparently there's a hard-coded location somewhere. And guys, that's what you get if you do improvisation. Okay, I'm going to rename the folder again. So it was FAB VFP folder. I'm going to call it like that again. Oh, come on. It's probably somewhere in the settings screen, and I didn't adjust it. I should have checked.
But you do not list pro in your configuration. You do list
What?
with the pro command.
No, it's absolutely there. Yeah, throw is part of that. So we didn't have to do that. There are some minor differences, and we have to try catch and try. Um, but I don't think you guys have a finally, do you? You do? Well, we've .NET has finally too. So those things are just there. You can also, by the way, convert a single form. So now let's hope. Fingers crossed. It's working and it's done. Hooray! Now I'm opening the folder and I'm opening the solution in Visual Studio. So let's see what we got. Okay, on the first in the solution, which is named after the project, that's created a folder with class libraries, a project with class libraries, and a project with the main project basically. So these are the forms, and this contains the related components. Now I'm not sure if this is what we will do in the end, because if you would have used those components somewhere else, it may have been a good idea to create a library for each component, so you could pick individual components and reuse them in another project. Right now they are included here. And inside these, you now see um, the source code, for example, for Auto Word. And yeah, I need to compile this first. I need to compile it. Okay, these are all visual things. Okay, this is new for me, right? Okay, any error that happens now, I have not seen before. So we will try to fix it. This is probably what you'll get to if you do your app. And because the main program depends on class libraries, it's going to start compiling the class libraries first. And considering how long it takes, it usually means that it produces a lot of messages. The compiler itself is fast, but the communication between Visual Studio and the compiler uh, may take a while. And as you see, it found several errors, also warnings. Let's ignore the warnings for now. And let's see what we find. Okay. The first error. Somehow um, some pictures are converted to strings and others are not. I think that the rule for the down picture and the disabled picture have not been set up properly, so that's why they have not been stringified. I can now choose to change that here, or I can go back to the converter and fix it there. For now, I'll just do it here, and then we can later fix it in the converter, but I want to make some progress. Oh, come on. Over here. Yeah, I've seen this before. Um, our with clause does not support the as toolbar yet. Um, in this case, we have a class which inherits from toolbar. So this is by definition a toolbar. So we will change the rule for this, but the as toolbar itself doesn't add anything. It's already a toolbar. So this doesn't kill the code, but of course we should allow to specify that. So that's something on our to-do list. Now we have, okay, we have again a property, and from the way I see it here, it's a string, and it's probably a user. I assume this is a user-defined property that they have added, and it's also not converted to a string.
Wouldn't be a definition, because there's no, it would have originally had to been quoted because it has internal spaces.
Let's check what it is done. Okay, we Fox Dev. So what I didn't show you is what we do is when we export, we create an XML file with everything that we've read from the project. And it was the property, I can't remember. Say apply. I'm in the wrong file. Come on, close all my windows. Okay. Not here. Where is it? Oh, it was in the libraries. Let's look for it. Over here. Yeah, it says string as a property. So this was read from the definition. So we need to convert that to a string. We're not doing that right now. So as you see, we do copy the value over, and I'm sure if we look somewhere, we'll find the value. But this needs to be converted to a string. And the same is probably true for path and default. These are declared as usual here, but we should be able to see that version and apply should be all strings. So this is something we need to look into, that those custom properties that were added to the form need to be converted to the right type. And we're not doing that right now. So that's why I said this is a challenge, because I have not done this before. And then nil, what my colleague put here, nil is the basic a kind of null, but different. It's too a bit out of the scope to explain the subtle differences. But this should be an empty string now, because we know it is not filled in this form, and the compiler should have generated as command. Keyboard in the dark. No, I'm sure end user ID is not a string. This is a string. This is a string. I'll leave it usual. But as you see, this kind of thing we need to fine tune, especially with regard to the user things. Over here, um, I think the macro in the expression here confuses the compiler. Is that true? Yeah. So our macro rule for the locate command, or I would say our preprocessor rule for the locate command doesn't like the ampersand sign here. As soon as you put the ampersand in there, you see that the locate keyword becomes black, so it's not recognized. Um, let's leave this for now.
And the ampersand, of course, is
Yeah, I know what
tiny value.
I know what. Yeah, I know what we have. Well, we have something like that. So this would work. If you get this would work in our variation. So the ampersand needs to be translated to something like this, but the compiler now doesn't recognize the ampersand there. one of the things we do with our preprocessor, we find expressions, but the ampersand in other contexts can also mean something else. So that's why um, it sort of gave up in matching this rule. We need to fix that. Now, over here, we see report form. We do not support that yet. The problem with that is that reports, there is no standard of that reporting tool. Um, if we want to um, disable this, I can now comment it out. Or what we also could do is go to um, this header file and add a command that says report form is not supported yet. Some of these things do that already. So what I could do here is add the command if I make a fake change, it should do. Um, can I have a 5 minute break? Or I have to have a bathroom break, and you guys probably want to too, and then we continue.
Are you fascinating anything with this people? How about you? Oh, getting busy again with, like, I'm almost done. I mean, I am done with it. I can very well the application, 5, 6 applications, visual applications.
Before I forget it, um, a development language without a book is not a development language, right? One of our German customers has written a book. Uh, now, it's not like with a press or something, but he did a PDF online. And I have three printed copies of those books. I don't want to take them home. So if you're interested, he does a step-by-step description of the language and all kind of features. He has a Visual Basic background, so he was new to XSharp, and he's enthusiastic. So it is written by a German, so some sentences are not the way you guys would have written them. He told me he used the grammar checker online based on AI, and I've seen his the beta version of his book. And to me, every now and then it's hurt on the eye, but this is much better because the Grammarly has He said I have corrected over 3,000 grammar errors in his book. So I'll put them in the front. If you're interested, pick one. I don't have enough for everybody, but the book is also available online as PDF, and you can print it yourself too. I don't think I have a link, but I can post a link on the website where you can download it from. So if you're interested, take one with you. Compendium is typically a German word. Don't think America would use compendium, but it's there, and we had a few extra copies. So it's an instruction, and it explains also step by step several language elements that are part of the .NET world, like the link, so language integrated query, um, switch statements that you guys don't have in FoxPro. So we do support all the normal stuff like for next and for each, but we've added also stuff that exists in the framework that didn't exist in FoxPro. Now, do we want to fix all these errors? Yeah, let's give it a try. I'll do it quickly. I see that my syntax for the command wasn't correct. I'll use something that's a bit brute force. Um, the syntax for the use define commands is a bit complicated, but as you see, it's blue now. So it has recognized this rule. What this rule does, it says report form followed by anything, just produce a warning. And this is another use define command, which is defined at the beginning of this file. That it's not showing it, but it says warning. This command is not supported. That way, the compiler will continue. It will put a warning in the warning window, and it will not output any code. Okay, yeah, this one is a bit more complicated. Um, we support calling Windows API functions, but not with this syntax. And the reason why is that this syntax declares a local function. So the function get redirect is now local to the scope of the function where are we? Do decal. And the way we support get redirect is not through something local. We declare it once, and then it's available in the whole class library. But since FoxPro doesn't have this concept of the class library, unless you, of course, compile an app, you declare external functions inside the body of a method or a function or procedure. So this particular syntax we do not support yet. We can, but I think it's better not to declare get redirect on a dozen places in your app, but have one definition and make sure that one definition is correct. So I can remove that now and we'll fix it later. And these are also Windows API functions, all of them. I'm not sure what this user has done, why he has put the API functions in there. Probably to do something sexy that's not available in .NET, in FoxPro. We'll see later. Let's hope that it's not a vital function that the rest will work. I expect that the rest will work. Oh, we have more pictures. Here we have another toolbar. We have another declare. On key we don't support yet. Let's put that one in here. Yeah, this is the that I warned for the select on cursor. Gonna comment this out right now. Yeah, param is a reserved word parameter. I think the compiler now gets confused, but if we would do and then make it an expression, then it will be not a problem, I think. Is it printed too? We'll still have, I'm a bit surprised, but on the other hand, I expected that we had some work to do to make this app running. So for now, let's see if we can get forms to open because that's what I wanted to show. Okay. Wait window. I thought Fabrice had a rule for that, but apparently not. And, oh yeah. We have the if command, but the if command in this case calls a runtime function. And at compile time, we have no runtime functions available. So either we make this a normal if, and then we can evaluate the runtime function, or we just ignore this. I think it's probably better to just, and if you have something literal like this, then the compiler won't mind because it can evaluate this at compile time. But a function call like that is not available at compile time. I'm not sure what Foxpro does here because
This is a function path, this is compile type command. So again, sharp is compile type command.
version 5, you mean?
No, it's deciding.
Yeah, but I know. But at compile time, Foxpro apparently uses the version of the compiler to detect whether to compile. Now, what we do have, but we have different version numbers. We don't have version 5, but we do have. We have this. That is a function from a preprocessor instruction of the current version of the compiler. But it's probably better for now to just ignore this, well, because our version numbers and the Foxtrot version numbers are completely not. So either we always compile this or we do not compile this. I can just also make this true, and then it compiles it, or make it false. Then it doesn't compile it. As you can see, our preprocessor is running in the editor. It was a bit of work, but as a result, you immediately see if the expression can be evaluated, and the preprocessor has access to the same things that the compiler has. So stuff like underscore version, or we have several others that match the particular compiler options. Those are all available in the preprocessor too. Let's see. I saw some other warnings about namespace, but I'm almost certain that these were because the compiler gave up because of this pictures without string delimiters, and it didn't finish compiling the rest of the source file. If you have ever done a compiler, you know that compiling valid code is easy, but compiling invalid code and deciding what to do with an error and where to pick up again, from which line to pick up, is a bit complicated, and especially if you have multi-line language elements like a for next or a for and for. So what do? Do you, if the first line inside a for and for is invalid, do you try to continue with the rest of the lines, or do you continue after the and for? Now, those are some things that may result in the fact that you find compiler gives up, you fix something, and it can find a new error a few lines below where it didn't get the first time when it was compiling. But the list gets shorter. Now we have more pictures. So these are typical situations where it has given up the first time, and I should have corrected the rule and done this again, exported again. But then I have to think about how things work, and the DLLs is related to these declined stuff, I assume. Yeah. It doesn't like to use in. I'm not sure what's wrong with this statement. I'm going to do it quickly now. The file is called parent. Like I said, our runtime is function driven. So now I don't want to write the complete UDC because there's something wrong with the user-defined command. But by putting functions in there, I can do the same thing that the compiler should do with this line. But I'm not sure why the syntax was failing.
It's just above the line you're on. What it's trying to do is select
A new, yeah, I know what it's trying to do. That's why I'm passing through here because it says open a new area. So select an empty.
you could
Yeah.
just say select 0 above it,
Yeah,
and then would take
yeah, but somehow it didn't understand it, and I'm just now. Let's see that the compiler can finish. This is weird. What can you explain to me what this does? Does it just call a function?
That's calling the function in a specific file.
Okay. Now there could be a problem, which Foxtrot probably would not complain about. But if there are two files with the same function name, this could help you choosing A or B. But we compile everything into one executable. So if you have two source files with the same function name, they will become part of the same .NET assembly, and then this syntax will not work anymore because those will be compiled into the same DLL. Now let's hope that the guy who wrote this code didn't do the same guess error in two files, because then we'll get a compiler error later on saying it's defined twice. What does show window do?
If a window is hidden, it will unhide it.
And the tab is a window.
That's something publicly array, publicly defined array. You got a name explains that.
I have no idea what it's done here. This is, yeah, the documentation doesn't help if you can't read the documentation. But I'm assuming that tableau means a table, means an array of different things. And it probably is going to show one of these.
I told you that this is a list of built-in windows of code, and we just open it again. It looks like when the final code, and we just check if some windows are open or not, and after the change
Yeah.
form, we reopen them.
For now, I'll just disable it because I have no idea why this fails. Let's see. This code is really dirty. So what is this supposed to do? Settings. Well, at least. Yeah. Yeah, I understand. Yeah. And we also have the macro compiler, but we do not have this. Our macro compiler doesn't do set whatever. We need to do extra script for that. More images. This should work. We have set decimals. No? I think if I had typed set decimal, we can change that. Yeah, okay. Um, Apparently, our definition doesn't include the S, and since this is a command that you can abbreviate, it will work also. So if I change our rule to accept the S, then this will definitely work.
I'm not sure what the purpose of setting it 18 is, but
I have no idea, but if you have ever inherited code from someone else,
yes,
then you will know that for half of the code lines you think, what are they doing? But okay, that's the way life is. Now I'm afraid that I will not be able to get it to completely compile before 5 o'clock. We're getting there. The list of errors is smaller and it repeats the same error, so that's good because the list gets smaller. Now it doesn't like it. Well, let's forget this then. For speed. Um, we have close all. That's the same. No.
that closes anything. Those forms, those volcanoes, those forms have holes. All that. That's a big deal.
Yeah, but in an executable running in XSharp, there are no open forms. Though these are windows that are shown or not shown, but we do not have things in design mode. But I understand the difference. Yeah.
The database table,
Yeah.
those tables will only go to tables.
Oh, it will not close the database. That's right. Yeah. Well, it is consistent. So if we change the rule, then uh, oh, that's the digits separator. I'll do that later. We have support for that, but for time, I will not finish that. But you see, functions like message book, we have almost everything covered. I wish I had changed the rule and recompiled. It would have been better. Thank you, Fabrice, for not fixing that. Okay. I think our user-defined command for store doesn't like the dots of the assignment here, but this should work. This does the same. Could have done it with a single equals to. Come on. So, I'm not sure if there's still people looking in the board, but I'm getting a bit nervous because we're reaching the end of the planned scheduled time, and I have compiled it. But we have the errors get less and less. Unfortunately, I know all what's going to happen because um, I have when you get the compiler has several phases basically, and we are still stuck now in the first phase where it tries to understand the language. But as soon as that's done, then it's going to check if the properties that we declared, if they really exist, yes or no. And it's very well possible that in the next phase it will complain about the properties. So it is not a no-brainer. Let's put it like that. And especially if you have, if we missed rules about the town picture that it must be a string, then it's probably it takes more time because these errors could have been fixed by the tool, and just like the with rule with as something that we need to fix. But let's turn it around. A lot of it does get recognized. See, it keep repeating the same problem. I like it when it's the same problem because then you know that at least you have only to fix one thing and then the rest will work.
And somehow you need to figure out what is the point.
Yeah, well, I see for these pictures were not included in the list of things that need to be stringified, and that's why it keeps on.
Or the other way around, what is the string of the property? That's how you think of it. That is the other problem too.
And I'm sure Fabrice would have gone in and changed the rule. Now we get other errors, like I said. Because now we get something like this is a bit more complicated. There are built-in properties for visible, for example. So if we create a visible assign, which basically allows it to set visible, then the .NET property needs to be you need to somehow make sure indicate that you're not going to replace the .NET property. So I will leave it for now because we will not it will take too much time. But um, as you see, it is an incremental process, and we get the code over. It's not compiling yet. I had hoped to finish it. I should have used a smaller example. I did a smaller example in the workshop, in the vendor session, and that worked. Also with some changes that I had to move some images around. Um, so is it a no-brainer? No. Converting apps will require work, either on the converter, like you saw with the stringify of some of the properties, um, and we may have to add some code, like the select statements and stuff. But are we close? Well, I think we're getting there, but we're not 100% ready, as you guys have seen. It depends on the complexity of the code that you bring over. Um, had hoped to show you the forms now in Visual Studio, but that will not work because um, you have to be able to compile the DLL to open it in the form editor. I could exclude a lot of things and just have a single form, and then you should see that it works. Um, maybe I can do that at the end. So take it. Let's from this class library. I have no idea which one worked, but let's please exclude these from the project. Yeah, now I should have. Everything is linked with everything. This uses the component. Okay, I can probably add that one too. Come on. I'm not sure why it's so slow, but this is probably because we're online and oh, component is huge. That's why it was slow. Now I should have stick to a small example because now I'm using more and more trouble. This needs to be excluded. So what we do is we put the original code also in the folder so that you can compare what have we done. Um, I'm sorry that we didn't manage to fix this and get it to run. I had no expectation that it would work, but I want to show you the process. I think you have seen the process. It's a lot of work, but also many things are working. So what we have done is we have in the code we couldn't get to see it running, but we have make some changes because forms and event handlers are a bit different. There's probably one that I can show in the code. That's I have one form. Oh, this one works, and this one doesn't. And I wanted to show the code. in here you see the double-click event, for example. And what we have done is where the original code had this parent double-click, it now has this object. And this object is an alias for the label control in this case. So where you was responding to the click on the label, we've now generated the method on the form. And where what change that we also made is that parent in FoxPro points to the form. It does in the Visual Studio in C# or in the framework, I would say in general too. But the parent is typed as form. So a user-defined method on the form class is not known in the system Windows Forms form class. So we've added a underscore parent, which is untyped. So in that case, you can call any method on it, including your custom methods. Now, we had to make a lot of those small changes to make sure that the code would compile. Some areas we do things strongly typed. In other areas, we have to make untyped properties, so your custom extensions to the form would be able to be called. This is what Fabrice here says. Okay, we also fixed some stuff like method calls. This refresh has no parens in the FoxPro code, but to be able to call a method, we add parentheses in the conversion code, because in .NET you cannot just call a method without using parens. In theory, we could put it in the compiler, say, okay, if you're calling a property and it is a method, let's assume that they wanted to call a method, but we thought it was better to do it the proper way, and so the code will be self-explaining. There is a method call and not a property. What we do is we have JSON files, and for example, the refresh method is included there, and for that reason, those methods will be converted. I've shown those. Sometimes it's good to go back to FoxPro, and if we find things, you can fix them on the FoxPro side, and we have to make sure that our JSON take stringifying and stuff like that. So I was aware that we're not there yet. This sample has shown that we're not there yet, but I think with a few changes to the exporter, we should be able to do 80% of the changes that I had to make now. We can do it automated, and then we have to focus on the rest of the things. Okay, it's 5 o'clock. I'm not sure if you guys have any questions. Yes? Is it possible to get what?
Your email address is
Robert@xsharp.eu. Yeah. Yeah, and you can also use, if you have questions, use our forum. There are many people there, not just the development team, but many customers that are willing to answer. We have a German language forum for those of you who have German as original language. We have an Italian language forum, so we have quite a huge Italian and German user base. And of course, all the other forums are in English. On the German language and Italian language, the dev team also answers, but not in Italian and not in German. We answer in English there, but that's usually for the customers not a problem. We use Google Translate, of course, to understand the questions. Like I said in the vendor session, we have a special offer. If you want to help support the development, use the, what was it? SSW Fox 2022 discount code to get a 50% discount on the subscription. It's not necessary to subscribe. You can download it if you register. But of course, like I said also in the vendor session, our development priorities are based on the people who pay us. So things in the FoxPro support will be finished earlier when we have more FoxPro subscribers. And we also ask people, if you subscribe or if you register, indicate your dialect of choice, or let us know that in another way, so we have an idea of where our customers are coming from. If you don't give us that information, we have to guess, and then it's difficult to see the priorities. We do custom work as well. We do conversions for customers. I have a proof of concept planned, and some of the things that I've seen here are definitely going to be visible in the customer project, the FoxPro project. So So some of these will be fixed anyway because we'll have to fix it for the customer. But it's very possible that you have properties in your code that we have never seen, or especially those things like user-defined properties that we're not handling correctly. We have to look into these and make sure that we support those the right way too. Since FoxPro is very open, we always find surprises. Uh, that's inevitable. We will find them. Stuff like you set stuff with an ampersand. I had no idea that you guys were sticking complete commands in the macro operator. Um, but apparently you do. So we'll have to see how we support that, either through replacing it with XSharp script, or in almost all of these cases, we have function-based solutions. So you probably don't even need that. So set decimals or set exact or whatever, we have a function. So our language differs from the Foxhole language. That everything is backed with a runtime function. And you can also solve a lot of these issues by directly calling the function and not using the command syntax. But we try to map the commands to these functions. But well, like this macro with the command, I'll have to see if we will support that, yes or no, because it's a complicated way of doing things because you had no alternative in FoxPro. Yeah. 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 Okay. The question, yeah. Okay. The remark is that the difference between macro expansion and an extra script is that the macro expansion has access to local variables, and that's indeed true. FoxPro is kind of strange in that area because uh, other development language, let's not call them normal, but other development language, local means not visible for anybody outside of this function, including the runtime. And FoxPro says, yeah, it's not visible outside of the function with the exception of the runtime. The runtime can touch everything. That's a bit dirty, but it's also powerful. We support that. We support indeed access to locals in the macros, but we have to do some dirty things to do that.
What was also interesting is for the most part, in Visual Foxhole would run anything that was written in the very first version
Yeah,
of Foxhole.
yeah. The remark here is that Visual FoxPro runs anything from the older versions of FoxPro 2, all the dirty stuff. Well, we have in our version of the X-based language also support for a lot of dirty old things, where you would think in a new app you would never use it, but it's inevitable if you bring 20, 25-year-old code over that you will have old stuff in there. Yeah, yeah. Stuff like show window command is all stuff basically, or wait window. You probably only use it for debugging, but not in a production app. Okay. I hear here that wait window is sometimes used to show progress. Used everywhere.
It'll be broken in every single Foxhole app.
Yeah, but I think we have a support for wait window built in, but I'm not sure whether a variation of the command with a certain parameter was supported by the user-defined command. But we do have that in there. We do also have a window where I'm not sure what the command the function is, but you have a function that you can have a window where you can data input. Input window, just like message box. We have that built in already, so we're emulating that in window, and the wait window is something similar like that. But I think the problem there is that the user-defined command didn't map a property from the command, and we'll take care of that. There are so many options possible, and especially the command syntax in FoxPro is a bit of a challenge for us. Yeah, well, our use-defined command supports also random order basically, for at least for all the optional elements, but it requires extra passes in the preprocessor to figure out which was passed or which not, and it matches something, starts again, it matches something until the complete input line is gone, or um, until it finds something that it cannot match. Okay, I want to leave it with that. It's a bit disappointing in the sense that the app that didn't run, but you guys can have an idea about the work that you have to do, and that we still have some work to do. I'm convinced that we will have the first the larger apps running in the not too far future too. For now, we are in the process of trying to bring the smaller things over, and yeah, we have some work to do. You guys have some work to do. I think if we work together, we can give Foxconn people also a migration path to .NET. Non-visual stuff is definitely going to work, but when you come to these forums and stuff, it's a bit more work. But it's absolutely not impossible. There is a possibility, and I would say there is a future also for your old code. Maybe it's not. Maybe it doesn't look as good as anything that you would write new in .NET, but there is definitely a future. Okay, thanks a lot. I hope you have at least something. Maybe you decide now, let's not do it, or maybe you decide, okay, give the guy a chance, and we'll see. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
You know, Christoph Wallerhaupt also said XScript doesn't see locals, just like a colleague here said.
So Ron,